Hey friends, welcome to another episode of the BE Educated Show podcast, where Hannah and I talk to you a lot about beekeeping, education, all that cool stuff surrounding bees, the environment, conservation, ecosystem, you name it. We love it. That's why we're here. And we're here for a lot of reasons, but we wanted to do this episode because we know this is the first season of the BE Educated Show. And Hannah's like, we got to give everybody an idea as to what we're going to talk about. Otherwise, they're not going to listen. So with that, I wanted to start with a very simple story so you kind of could get the gist of why we're doing this. At Beepods, we work with a lot of schools. And one of the schools we work with here in Wisconsin had a student. And their school is based around at-risk students. And this at-risk student was struggling a lot, until they found a way to build engagement with some innovating education tactics, tools, strategies, philosophies, etc. So the cool thing about this student is that they put this project together all on their own. They found it, they funded it with a grant, they wrote the grant, they did all the work, they put together the team, and guess what? He graduated from potentially not graduating. Now he graduated, he went to college, and now he comes back every year to help with the bees and help the students every summer. So I share that story with you because, one, it gives me chills every time I think about it, that we helped the student go from not graduating potentially to then being super engaged in the community and having hope in the future. Our whole season is going to be built around innovative education. We're going to have a whole bunch of guests on. Hannah's going to tell us a couple stories here coming up about how this has helped her and how it's helped define learning and teaching. But specifically, we know right now for all educators out there, it's really hard to stay positive. Hannah, have you dealt with a bunch of people who are stuck in like COVID brain, where they're trying to like figure out how to engage their students? Do you have some friends out there doing that?
Yeah, and actually it's really much more challenging with how things are working technologically and just, communicating through screens, because we aren't able to connect with the students we have the same way. And I think that's a really important topic for what we're doing now, but into the future as well, because, we always want to engage our students in whatever capacity that we can do so.
How has this, if you had to guess, how has this affected like the teacher's mindset around school and teaching?
Working as a teacher is already a lot as far as all the challenges and things that you have to juggle with tasks, and trying to engage students is hard enough when you're in person, and trying to figure out the best ways for students to learn individually is much more challenging when you're facing a screen and not necessarily being able to answer questions the same way you can, and trying to find new activities and new ways of expressing the material. So it's definitely added a large amount of challenges to what we're trying to get out. And so trying to work through these challenges and find these more innovative ways to engage students is really critical at this time.
I'm picturing all of the teachers that we work with doing what we're doing right now, but the only difference is it's you and me one-on-one, and for them, it's like 30 little squares that they're watching constantly, and potentially seeing like mom or dad walking past, or the dog come up and jump on the kid's lap, and like, now they're not only having to manage a classroom, but having to manage, like, can you imagine if you were working with kindergartners or first graders in this realm, like where you're like, all right, Joey, I need you to color the picture and stop letting the dog lick your face, right? Like,
there are just so many like additional components that you have no control over when you're in a classroom versus when you're facing screens. That is a really good point.
Or kids eating lunch together, right? Like hearing these stories of kids like oh, we can't trade our snack packs anymore, or I can't get your string cheese and you can't get my apple, right? Like the general commerce of that whole thing just is like gone.
That's what's so special about education communities anyway, is just being able to connect with not only your students, but have the students connect to each other. And yeah, it's very different dynamic going on right now.
Yeah, and so one of the, again, we want to use this season. I mean, at Beepods, we focus a lot, and we're going to share with you in a later episode about how we work with schools and why it works. But we work a lot with teachers who are trying to find new and engaging ways to work and help their students learn, and not just learn concepts, right? Not just learn like history facts or science facts or how to do math or how to write a compound sentence, right? Not just that, but having them engage. Because if you leverage the right tools, you will gain positive stories. It will recharge your batteries constantly. And especially right now, when you can't recharge your batteries by going to that conference with all your teacher friends, where you can actually complain or may I say bitch about that bad student that you just can't get through to because they keep showing up, and you're curious and you want to help them so badly that it just drives you nuts. But like, we're in this weird time. But the thing is these innovative concepts can be used, right? Whether it's outdoor education, whether it's guided or problem-based learning, or whether it's just getting kids to go outside in a guided environment in their backyard for their homework to make sure they're getting outside now. We know that engagement of students really, there's stats that show that kids who are engaged are 4.5 times more likely to be optimistic when they graduate school or move on from school. So that means every kid that you're not engaging with right now, or let alone, let's say this is 5 years from now and COVID is not a thing, and you're hearing this for the first time, and you're going, oh yeah, all of this stuff works. If you look at the research and you look at the tools that are out there and everything that's out there, it's all based around the same concepts. It's all about, hey, how do I engage a kid so that he wants to ask more questions, or she wants to have an experience where she's working with a team, or she gets so obsessed with like the theme or the motif that you're using to teach, whether it's like art or math or bees or trees and plants, whatever that is, that now you have a real world thing that student can engage with and grab onto and make it real for them. So it's not just in a book. I think that that's the biggest part of this whole thing. And you've talked about it, Hannah, with me about stories of how that even though this increases performance for the kids, like their academic performance across, they gain on that one thing and all of a sudden their grades increase across all disciplines, math, science. Let's say they get in touch with bees and it's from a science standpoint. All of a sudden their grades go up in English and math and history. And you're like, wait, that makes no sense, but they're engaged in school. But you've talked about it from a teacher's perspective. You want to share that story?
Sure. Well, I think that it's important too to mention that sometimes we're not able to see the long-term effect of what it is to be teaching in engaging ways. If you're working a program, like I've had experience in environmental education and just doing programs that might just be, a week of their time, or maybe just an hour of something like a field trip, it's hard to see what that might look like in the long term. But as for a specific example, I think of a time when I had a kid in my group where I was working a summer camp trip, and we were able to be with the kids for a full week. This kid had some learning disabilities, so it was really hard to engage him in just our group activities and being able to, sit down and look at something small, but just finding the ways to connect with the kids that you're working on with in hands-on, engaging ways, and seeing the progression throughout the week and finding those different ways that help to connect your student and having those activities that bring the connection between what you're trying to get out, which is pretty much like your learning objective, but finding innovative ways for your student to be able to still get the most that they can out of the experience that you have together is really important.
Yeah, or what about those students who like refuse to learn, like they're actively making a choice? When you get one of those students going and all of a sudden they're engaged, how does that feel?
It can be really frustrating, I'm not gonna lie, but I think that it's definitely a challenge that we all have to overcome at some point, especially when we're working in large group settings, because ultimately it comes down to what those students are getting out of the experience. And if they're not engaging with what's going on right now, then who's to say what they're going to get out of it in the long term? And that's really what is important, what we want them to take away from the experience.
Have you had I'm sure you had, but you've had those students where all of a sudden you have that breakthrough. How does that feel for you, like selfishly, as an educator? How does that feel?
It's amazing to just be able to have those moments where, like those aha moments where it clicks for the student, and seeing that in some way you're getting through to what you wanted them to be experiencing. Yeah, and even if you really aren't seeing those long-term benefits, like, you know, that at least for that moment, they're enjoying themselves, they're getting something out of the learning experience, and you can feel some kind of gratification as your role as a teacher to see that it's finally coming into place.
Yeah, I think about specifically a story when I was a camp counselor, and we were teaching a class on edible plants out in nature, right? And the kids like, ew, like didn't understand that this is where their food came from. And, and so we'd walk out and we knew all the food was safe, right? Where we took them, right? We had them eat like dandelion leaves, and we said, hey, you know, this ends up in the salad that mom gives you every once in a while, especially if she buys the plastic bags from the store. And they were like, really? Or like, we brought them upon raspberries. And this was the greatest thing. We had this one kid who wouldn't eat anything. And all of a sudden he saw the berries. He's like, I wanted to know if I could eat those this whole week. I was like, yeah, grab one. And he ate one. He's like, this is amazing. And I said, yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that out here, but you also have to be careful that you don't eat the poison ones, but understand that your food, this is where your food comes from. Like to see that like aha moment, because this kid would not eat anything until that raspberry hit his mouth. And then he wanted to go back and try everything. Like that little victory for me was finally like, thank God, finally.
And that's what's great about those clicking moments too, is because once you have that foot in the door, then the kid is going to be more interested in going back and being more engaged with the group, and maybe, like you said, the things that you were trying to get them engaged in beforehand. Yeah.
Yeah. Or my favorite is when those kids become the leader and all of a sudden they start collaborating, and they're typically not a collaborator. So that engagement aspect of like something that clicks and all of a sudden hooks them in. Now they want to work with everybody when in fact they wanted to used to just be off by themselves. Or now they're thinking about the news stories that their mom or dad watch, and they're like, oh my God, that's where this comes from. Or even the fact that it's the quiet kid and now they're talking and they're figuring out how to communicate, right? That whole social emotional learning aspect of it, where they're beginning to define a sense of self in that small group through that engagement aspect, because that door's never been opened for them, right? I mean, in the case of like food, right? Food is interesting because it hits all those other senses, but there's so many studies on like, if you want your brain to get reignited, you're supposed to eat sour food. So sometimes when you give a kid like a Sour Patch Kid or something like that all of a sudden spikes the neurological pathways, it lights up the brain in a positive way where now the brain is more open to stuff. I'm hoping we can get somebody on. There's a book out there that I've read before where there's actually a teacher who uses food I like introduce concepts in a class, and that's how they get the kids like hooked right away. And it's not a lot of food, but like you give a kid food and all of a sudden they're like, oh, food, positive, like it's like a dog almost, right? Feed me, I'll listen. It's that whole process of it, but it's really interesting to find there are millions of different ways to engage with students. And our hope here is that these tools, these people, and these positive stories we introduce you to, that you will understand that even though we're in this weird time, that you as an educator, whether you're working at like the Urban Ecology Center here in Milwaukee or the ELC, which Hannah's going to share some stories with, and we're going to have some of those individuals on, or if you're in the classroom, right? You're literally working from your home half the week and you're in the classroom with a small group the other half the week. You can still engage students. And now the cool thing about this, the reason I think this is so critical is that because we are in this really messed up time of education, now's the time you actually have some carte blanche to try some stuff. So my hope, and I know Hannah's hope, is that you'll take some of these things and you'll go and you'll seek out, how do I implement that in the classroom? And those are the extra resources that we have on the website and on Beepods, and we'll point you to in the show notes of each of these episodes, that you'll be able to actually go in, download the information, access the information in some way, shape, or form, and be able to try it. Because I think right now more than ever, and we'll find out, because Hannah's actually going to introduce us to one of those administrators who worked for one of those, for the ELC, who's actually going to share some details on how to best implement this if you're not the person who's able to make the decision, but hopefully help convince that person on why this is a good idea. So with that, I'm taking all your thunder. Who's coming up? Who have you talked to that we've got coming up, and maybe just drop some teasers or hints of what they'll be talking about?
Sure. So the ELC, as Brad mentioned, is the Environmental Learning Center, and it's a really interesting nonprofit, not just because it's based in environmental education, but because the director, who we'll have on, Nicole, is really starting to make the nonprofit all about education as framing it towards the educators. So having been through and worked at the Environmental Learning Center myself, and we'll have some other people who have also gone through and worked at the ELC with me, it's been a really interesting experience to be learning all of these innovative education techniques while also studying at the university in Colorado State University. So it's really interesting to see both sides of the administration part of that, as well as what it looks like on the ground to be connecting educators and students and community members and trying to make these experiences kind of a community process. We'll also have some more expertise from Vanessa, who is a very experienced teacher. She's worked in several university settings. She's a 2-time volunteer for the Peace Corps, so she's had a lot of cultural experience in teaching in different languages and different age groups. And yeah, so we'll have quite a variety of things going on this season, and I'm really excited to start these conversations.
So as you can see, we've taken some time, we've done our homework, we're really trying to find some really cool people who we know have some really powerful stories, and they're positive. And we're going to have a ton of fun this season. And our hope is, here's the deal. If you know of somebody and you're listening to this and you're like, hey, this person needs to share their story, part of what we want to do is also be a platform for those people. We know that teachers are overworked. We know teachers are underappreciated. And we know that teachers are doing it. And if they've been doing it for a long time, they're doing it for the right reasons. And they're trying to be innovative, and they're trying to make an impact on the world in the way that they know they are skilled best to do. And that's by making sure the youth, young and old youth, and I'm going to say young and old youth because I'm sure we're going to get some university professors who share stories about the retirees who come back when they're retired and learn and then leave a legacy too. So This is supposed to be fun, it's positive, and you're going to get tools, tactics, techniques, strategies, you name it, whatever terminology you want to use, and we'll do our best to make sure we define the acronyms since we know education is filled with them. So PBL, STEM, STEAM, NST, like we'll break that down for you too. So if you hit that and you've got questions, you'll always be able to ask those questions. All you got to do is go to BEEEducatedshow.com, click on the show notes, and if you have questions, you'll be able to contact us there as well. All right. So with that, I don't want to share any more stuff today because I know we've already taken up a ton of people's times, but I hope you're excited. I hope you think that if you don't need this now, I hope you come back next week and at least hear the stories. And maybe at some point in time, if you start leveraging the tools and the techniques, we'll have you on too. Sound good? How's that sound, Hannah? Should we get some more people on here?
Yeah, it'll be really exciting to just hear everyone else's experiences because that's cumulatively what helps everyone else as a teacher.
Yes, it does. So with that, I'm Brad James.
I'm Hannah Dreesing.
And we'll see you next time on the Be Educated Show, where we really try to be the champion in innovative education. We'll see you next time. Take care.